Well, hey everyone, great to be with you. Welcome back for another devotional. Today we're going to be in Acts chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. And though it's only a few verses, there's lots of stuff we can pull out of this. And today I want to just share with you three thoughts that I think is more than enough for us to be able to meditate on it and pray about today. Just to catch us up a bit of what's going on in this part of the account in Acts, a man named Stephen was just killed for his faith in Jesus, the first recorded Christian martyr in the scriptures. And as he dies, a man named Saul, who later will become Paul, who writes the majority of the New Testament, is there as witness and as validating the murder of Stephen. And this is what happens right after that occurs. It says, Saul approved of his execution. And there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. Just a few things here. First, there's oftentimes people who feel like they've just screwed up so bad in life. They have made so many bad choices. They have done things that have hurt themselves or hurt others in ways that they feel are truly unforgivable. And it may not even be a conscious thought, but deep down, if you really think about it, you feel that there's no way, I'm not even going to consider turning to God because I've been so wicked in my life, so bad in my life that he couldn't possibly forgive me. Here we see case in point that is not the case with the God of the Bible. You see this man Saul, who, as I said earlier, later becomes Paul after he converts and sees Jesus for who he really is. And Paul ended up being one of the greatest, if not the greatest evangelist and one of the greatest servants of God and of Christ. Saul was a man who became Paul, who knew that he was free from condemnation because of faith in Christ and in Christ's work on the cross for him. Paul says that he's the chief most of all the sinners. Paul writes in Romans 5 that while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. That God is in the business of reconciling and saving and redeeming and forgiving those who are opposed to him. And so if you're listening to this right now and you're at a spot in your life where you are too ashamed or feel like your sin is too bad, just know that this man, Paul, who is there approving of the very first murder of a Christian, a follower of God, that Jesus personally seeks him out and welcomes him in to his kingdom and family. And the same is true for you, anyone listening in. That you can receive God's grace and forgiveness simply by turning to Jesus and saying, I give you my life. I'm going to trust in what you've done for me on the cross. I know that I've messed up. I'm going to trust that you can take all of that, all my brokenness and sin, and I give it over to you, and I give you my life. And I ask for your forgiveness, that Jesus is faithful and just to forgive you and cleanse you from all unrighteousness. And today you can cry out and do that. Secondly, for those of us who are Christians, let this remind us that God is in the business of changing those that seem the most far from him. Right? This is radical that Saul, who is here approving of the execution, who's ravaging the church, he's taking, it's one thing to arrest the men of a home, but another thing to arrest the women. Like, he's going after everyone who's a Christian. It's like, in modern day, think of like the head of a terrorist organization. We don't even think about praying for them. That's kind of like how Saul is. But we can pray even for those people, knowing that no one is actually far from God, but he's actually near all of us. And no one is not capable of turning and receiving Christ and being saved. And thirdly, we see here that it was through persecution that the gospel spread. Jesus said back in chapter 1 that you are to be my witnesses not only in Jerusalem, but in Judea and Samaria to the ends of the earth. And here we see Jesus' words are fulfilled of the spread of the gospel through this persecution, through this horrible, trying circumstance and situation that happens. Persecution, people being arrested, and later we're going to see are being killed and tortured and terrible things. And yet God uses that for the gospel and the good news of the kingdom to spread and go out. And so in our own lives, when we have circumstances and trials that seem difficult, right, that seem, God, why are you doing this? We can know and trust that God is working all things together for the good of those who love him. He's working all things together for the good of his kingdom and his gospel going out. His good plan of redemption of all things, of reconciling all things back to himself. That God even takes the sinful actions of others, right? God is not causing these people to persecute the church, but he takes their sinful choices and actions and flips it and uses it for good in the end. So those are kind of the three thoughts for us. One, if you're not a Christian, or if you feel like you are too far from God's forgiveness, that's not true. That Jesus, he's for you. He wants you to come to him, and your sin is not greater than his sacrifice and what he's done for you. And if you're a Christian, remember that today. Celebrate that today. Secondly, for those of you who are Christians, pray for your friends who aren't saved, and coworkers and neighbors and people that you feel there's no way God can save them. That's a lie. Pray for those people. Pray for their salvation. God can do it. And thirdly, look at the circumstances in your life and in the lives of those around you that look like there's no possible good that can come out of this. And be reminded that even terrible circumstances, God can bring good and bring his will through those things. That all things are really in his control and sovereign will. And he's a good God and a just God, and promises to reconcile all things to himself. And one day we'll set all this right. And this is all part of his plan. And we can rest in that. So, love you guys, and hope you have a really great day.